To be honest, these days air traffic is so similar both in the civil and the military that the two combine flawlessly, to be honest. There are absolutely no issues. The regulations are very similar in many respects, and the service we provide is with civil licenses anyway. But as I say, in terms of phraseology and things like that, there are almost no differences. So yeah, flawlessly, I would have to say.
So in fact, you're employed by NATS rather than the RAF here?
I'm employed by NATS. It's quite a complex contract in the way it's been managed, because Gibraltar falls under a much wider MOD piece, which is a Marshall Airports contract, which is a process by which the MOD are refreshing the equipment at many of their airfields, and there are a number of air traffic services provided at a number of airfields, and we fall under that contract. So I work for NATS. NATS is contracted to another company called Aquila, and Aquila is contracted directly to the MOD.
All right, interesting. Now, since the construction of the new terminal here in the back end of 2011 and 2012, the whole airport seems to have taken on a new life. What other expansion plans does the airport have, and will that mean that you'll have to update your systems here?
Well, as I've just alluded to, the MOD itself is updating a lot of our equipment, the radars, both primary and secondary radar, the radios. So it won't involve a great deal of procedural changes for us. There will be certainly some changes in the way we see the equipment, the way the information is delivered to us. We'll have Mode S on the SSR, for instance, so we'll have more information available. Procedures should remain very similar. Hopefully we'll have nice, reliable equipment, modern equipment requiring relatively little servicing, which would be fantastic. The airport itself is working. There's a huge project going on at the moment to build a tunnel under the eastern threshold of the runway. That will clearly make a huge difference to the operation and the potential for the airfield. At the moment, of course, I'm sure many people will know that we have a very major highway that runs right across the middle of the runway. That highway links Gibraltar and Spain, so all traffic, whether it's on foot, on bicycle, on motorbike or in lorries, everything has to go straight across the middle of the runway, and that of course involves a process whereby every time an aircraft lands we have to close that road and make sure that the runway is available and safe for an aircraft to land on. In about 18 months we expect the tunnel project at the eastern end to be complete, and then all of that traffic will be moved to the tunnel, meaning that there's no impact between aviation and that road transport, which would be fantastic, because of course it means we can operate as many flights as we can possibly attract into the airfield without upsetting the day-to-day workings of Gibraltar in terms of people's comings and goings.
I was going to ask you about the tunnel project. This has been some time coming, hasn't it? Do you think it will totally transform the way the airport operates?
It gives the airport a huge opportunity. It'll certainly transform the way we operate up in the tower, because a large part of the process to make the runway safe for aircraft involves ensuring that we have the road closed, secured, the runway clean of any foreign object, debris that may have fallen off a vehicle, or litter that people may have thrown. So clearly that takes some time to prepare the runway for an aircraft to land. All that process will disappear overnight once the tunnel is open, and we could potentially then exploit the runway to its full capacity, which could be as many as 12 movements an hour here. There's quite a long back track, so it does limit us, but 12 movements an hour would still be very significant if we could get anything like that. So huge potential once the tunnel is completed, yes.
Just think about the upgrades that you're thinking of doing, and with technology advancing in the field of GBAS, which is ground-based augmentation systems. Are airlines looking for better facilities at airports, precision approaches and that kind of thing, so they could better utilise what we'll have available?
Yes, of course. At the moment, the way we operate here is we do have a radar. We provide radar services to aircraft and tower services to aircraft. Because of the nature of the approach to runway 09 in particular, which is 90 degrees to the runway, you fly up the Bay of Gibraltar and then turn 90 degrees at about 3 miles. An ILS would be of no value whatsoever on that runway. It would do nothing. So if an aircraft needs a ground-based aid, we do that using the primary radar, and a surveillance radar approach would be flown. Clearly, we have somebody dedicated to providing that service, so we can operate as many of those as there is demand for them. However, the local authority has also now invested in an RNAV approach, so hopefully in the very near future we'll have an RNAV approach available as well. I know pilots like to fly it already, however at the moment there is a restriction because we're still proving the approach, so they can only fly it in good weather conditions. Clearly it'll be advantageous when they can fly it in poor weather conditions, and that will clearly facilitate arrivals for aircraft. It'll also mean that they have more stable approaches, fewer go-arounds. Not that we have a huge number of go-arounds, but obviously it's one of the few airports that a modern airline pilot has to fly the aircraft onto the ground these days. So just occasionally, maybe because of the weather, maybe because of the wind, or maybe because we just haven't quite got the lineup correct, we do have the odd go-around because of that.
Just thinking about that approach onto 09, of course, that's a very critical manoeuvre to carry out because obviously you want to steer clear of the Spanish airspace, I guess. But how do you actually interface with your Spanish colleagues on a day-to-day basis?
Well, the centre is Seville, and every aircraft is handed controller to controller, so there are no automatic processes there. So we communicate with Seville, we have a direct line and we talk every day, several times a day to them. We have a letter of agreement in place about how we operate and how we interface, and it works very well, to be honest. There are no, fortunately air traffickers are professionals through and through. Flight safety and expedition is all they're interested in, and we have a fantastic relationship with Seville and work very closely together to ensure that whatever is going on in the airspace in the vicinity of Gibraltar happens safely.
Do you think with the UK leaving the European Union in March of next year, do you think that's going to have much operational effect on what you do here?
That's clearly a big question that I don't think anybody absolutely knows the answer to. I'd like to think, and I'm pretty confident, that it won't have any impact in terms of the provision of air traffic services. As I said earlier, we've got a letter of agreement with Seville. So we have a modus operandi that we just continue to use. So unless for some reason it becomes politically complex, and I really can't answer to that, I don't see any reason why the way we operate here should change at all.
Yeah, interesting. I think it's all about being professional and working with other like-minded professionals too.
It absolutely is, and I think that will hopefully extend throughout Europe in terms of the aviation industry, and I really don't think it's in anyone's interest to see the aviation industry disrupted at all. We all want to go on holiday, we all need to do business, we all need to fly around. More people are flying than ever. I think in the UK last summer was the busiest year on record. That's only likely to grow. It's only likely to grow around Europe, so it's absolutely in nobody's interest to throw a spanner in that particular works. So I really don't think Brexit will have a major impact, but as I say, nobody really knows the answer.
We're considering doing a Brexit special on the show, but it's so inflammatory at the moment. I think we might leave that until things have settled down a bit next year.
I think that's sensible, yes. And I think the biggest issue is everyone can speculate, but nobody knows the answer. So, and is there much value in speculation? Probably not.
Just thinking about the operations here, in 2016 British Airways A320 had quite a serious bird strike just on its takeoff run. Are birds a particular problem around the airport here, do you think?
They are a problem, as they are at any airport, and obviously different airports have different bird species which are a problem species. For us, the problem is the yellow-legged gull. It's a herring gull, effectively, which is quite a large bird. Fortunately, it doesn't fly in flocks, so you're not going to hit a flock of them. You may hit a bird. I still am confident that actually we have wildlife control on the airfield for every aircraft movement at the fast end of the runway, if you like, dispersing birds all the time, keep particularly that species away. We have a very good relationship with the local authority because, of course, the birds aren't really based on the runway, if you like, or on the airfield. They roost on the rock. They go and feed in the waste tips over the frontier in Spain at various landfill sites. So they tend to be transiting across the airfield, and we can disrupt that. We work closely with the local authority in terms of keeping the numbers down as far as the roosting on the rock goes. We even have a very good relationship with developers, so anyone who's going to develop a building close to the airfield, and in Gibraltar pretty much everything is close to the airfield. One of the hoops, if you like, that they have to go through is to satisfy the airfield and the aviation authorities that their development isn't going to have a negative impact on-flight safety, and apart from the obvious things like height and glare from the windows, bird management and bird control is one of the factors that they have to consider, and they have to satisfy the authorities that their building isn't going to attract birds near to the airfield, which may then obviously fly towards the airfield if they're startled. So we've got many processes in place. We are acutely aware that birds are a risk, but I think it's a very well managed risk. It's a well understood risk, well managed. You are obviously occasionally going to be unlucky, but really we have 3 or 4 bird strikes a year close to the airfield, and the majority of them are fairly minor, and the aircraft just continue once they've been inspected.
It's interesting, isn't it, that there's so much attention paid to building regulations and this kind of thing with regard to the airfield. I hadn't realised that was such an important part of the development here.
Yes, and it keeps us all very busy all of the time, to be honest, because there is a lot of development going on in Gibraltar, and we really do have to be careful that we don't in effect make it impossible to operate the airfield because some development's been approved that seriously infringes the obstacle limitation surfaces, that causes tremendous glare down the approaches at a particular time of year. So there are many factors that need to be considered with every development. But as I say, the developers in Gibraltar are aware of the issue. They're very good, even to the point of raising cranes and lowering cranes. We find ourselves engaged on almost a daily basis with talking with developers about can they raise that crane, what time should it go up, what time must it come down by. So it's a very good relationship. There's an acute awareness that the airfield needs to operate.
Certainly, since I haven't been here for a couple of years, I've noticed a lot more development going on in the last 2 years here.
Yes, it's a bit of a building site, to be honest, when you walk around Gibraltar. I'll say no more than that.
And what was your personal career progression that got you sat here at the tower at ATC?
I was actually born in Gibraltar, educated in the UK, and in my early 20s I came back, and having been an employee of British Telecom in the UK actually, I left that, came back. At a time when it was announced that the air traffic was going to be civilianised by the RAF. I saw that as an opportunity, and so off I went to do my licences. Fortunately got my licences, but wasn't returned straight to Gibraltar. Did some work in Llanbedr in the north of Wales, actually operating Gindervics, they're called, which are basically these days would be a drone which exercise in the areas just off the Welsh coast with the Air Force or the Navy. Spent about a year there, a little bit of time also learning the ropes at Woodvale, and that was with Serco. And then Serco brought me to Gibraltar and worked as a controller, tower and radar here for a number of years, 11, 12 years, before the opportunity to become the manager came along. Did the interviews and became the manager. I live in Gibraltar, it's my home, and I couldn't have a better job, quite honestly.
What other challenges would you say that there are here at Gibraltar?
Water at both ends of the runway. Not unique, of course, there are many airports that have that. We have a cruise liner terminal quite close to the end of the runway, and cruise liners these days, as most people who have been on a cruise will be aware, are enormous. So they're a significant consideration. We again have an agreement with the Port Authority about the movement of the cruise ship, so we work very closely with them to make sure that aircraft movements and cruise movements are deconflicted. We have a number of marinas near the airfield, which again we need to manage, and we have agreements with the marinas so that we don't get vessels with tall masts coming out at inopportune moments and affecting flights. We're always vigilant to these things, but clearly what we don't want to do is have a flight disrupted because something's in the wrong place at the wrong time. So we manage that very carefully. The weather itself, Gibraltar's a very unique microclimate. So in early summer we tend to get a lot of fog in the morning because a warm easterly wind coming from the Levant blows across cold waters. They're still very cold in June, and obviously moisture comes out of that and we get fog. So fog can be a challenge, although not a challenge we can do much about. And probably for pilots, one of the biggest challenges can be the wind. Southwesterly winds in particular blow across the rock, which is only about 500 metres from the runway itself, across final approach. And that can set up all sorts of very difficult and challenging turbulence, from just straightforward lumpiness that you might expect on final approach normally, to a large rotor that sets itself up that creates quite a substantial up and down draft. So what tends to happen is aircraft fly into the rotor if it's there, and you can often see it there by the patterns on the water beneath it. So the aircraft flies through it at anywhere between 4 and 2 miles, and it enters an area of downdraft. So the aircraft gets pushed down. Of course, the pilots put power on to compensate for that, and then hit the updraft, which lifts them above the glide path, and often too far above the glide path. So whilst it's not particularly dangerous, it makes it impossible to land because it's a 6,000 foot runway, 1,800 metres. So at that point, if you are a bit high or too high, certainly in an airline, you're not going to be able to land. The wind can then cause very extreme conditions. We can get water spouts and things, off final approach. Once conditions get like that, nobody even makes an approach. Pilots are warned off.
They're all off to Malaga at that point.
I'm afraid there's a diversion to Malaga. Yes, there's nothing we can do about that. Again, it's always safety first. For us operating as NATS in Gibraltar, and for the airlines and for the MOD, safety comes first. So nobody's going to try and do anything silly and land in those sorts of conditions. And quite frankly, if I were a passenger on the back of a plane, I don't want to be thrown around either.
Exactly. When an aircraft does divert to Malaga, is it the airline's responsibility to get the coaches there for the operator?
Assisted by the local handling agency, it's fundamentally the airline's responsibility. Obviously, if it's a case that they know the weather's really bad and the forecast is really bad, they may well operate straight to Malaga, in which case it's quite a slick operation getting buses. The buses are waiting for you. If it's an unexpected diversion, which may occur for who knows what reason. If it's unexpected, the delay's a little bit longer, but again, it's a pretty slick operation. It will cause you a 3 or 4 hour delay on your flight, but it's not as bad as you might think. And I need to point out that diversions, although I think people have a perception that we have a high number of diversions, we have a low percentage. It's probably under 1% of flights a year divert to Malaga, so it's not bad. It's not bad at all.
Certainly looking at the approach plates to Gibraltar here, some of the patterns that you see, as you've just mentioned, look quite horrific, and it is possible to get a tailwind at both ends of the runway.
That can happen. Fortunately, it's usually a relatively light tailwind, but particularly in the summer, if the wind backs because of the sea breeze, which is basically created by the land heating up and sucking air up, and that causes a south, or rather a westerly wind, to back towards the southwest, or even as far as south if it's a very light wind. What happens, is it obviously it hits the rock. The rock almost acts like the bow of a ship, splits the wind, and then the wind curls around the rock, and we end up with possibly a 4 or 5 knot tailwind at both ends of the runway. That's usually actually fine for the airlines. It's just about within their tolerances, so it seldom causes a major issue, but obviously pilots have to be acutely aware that they are landing with a tailwind. The margins are very comfortable. Modern A320s, which is the majority of the flights we get here, but we get 737s as well occasionally, and even 757s very occasionally, can stop very quickly, and they rarely need to apply their full brakes. They tend to be stopped perhaps 2/3 of the way down the runway and under control.
Yes. Does the operation here allow for any GA flying at all?
Yes. I think it's fair to say very few people are turned away. So yes, we get a lot of business jets. That's clearly for those who can afford it, or for those businesses who actually, time is very much money, need to operate that way. We get a lot of business jets here. They represent about 25% of our overall traffic. Smaller GA is unusual. We mostly see it in the summer, and by smaller GA, obviously I'm talking about your Pipers, your Cessnas. They may arrive in the summer, usually Europeans, French or Germans who are flying down to Morocco perhaps, and I think Gibraltar's a good one to have in the logbook, so they'll often request, and they will usually be accepted. Perhaps not in every case, and certainly once the tunnel's ready, I'm sure they will all be accepted and very welcomed.
Yes, it'll certainly transform the operation here, I'm sure, when that happens.
Yes, as you can imagine, it's It can be quite difficult if you've got 4 or 5 GA aircraft fairly close together. You don't really want to close the road for half an hour and bring Gibraltar to a gridlocked standstill for the sake of landing 3 or 4 PA-28s. It would probably not be an appropriate use of people's time, and it would hurt the economy. But once the tunnel is gone, of course, there are no restrictions then. So yes, hopefully once we have that tunnel, everything will be accepted.
Well, Trevor, it's been an absolute pleasure speaking to you today. Thank you very much indeed for your time.
No, thank you very much, Nev. Much appreciated. Always good to talk about the airport.